welcome to my channel. This is the first in a three-part series where I take a look at the exposure triangle. You may be wondering, what is the exposure triangle? The exposure triangle are three elements: the aperture, shutter speed, and ISO, that works together to create an exposure. You have to manipulate all three elements to ensure that you don't have an image that is too bright or too dark. Because these three elements are linked together, if you change one setting, it will have an influence on the other two settings. As well as changing the exposure, each element has an effect on the final image. In which one to change for each photography situation is important. Understanding the exposure triangle is an important part of improving your photography. Once you have a better understanding, you'll be able to take more control of your camera and your final image. Today I'll be focusing on aperture. I'll explain what aperture is and what effects it have on your image. Aperture is the opening inside your lens. Light passes through that opening to the camera sensor. You can adjust the size of the aperture to regulate the amount of light that goes to the camera sensor. Aperture works like your eyes. The pupils act like the aperture of a camera, regulating the amount of light that travels through the lens to the retina. In dark environments, the pupils open, and in light, they close. If you look through the lens of a camera and dial in the aperture settings, you'll notice some similarities. Wide aperture will result in a brighter image, and a smaller aperture will result in a darker image. Apertures are displayed in numbers called Fstop, and their ranges from around f1.8 to f22. The numbers will be larger or smaller depending on the lens. The f-stop you choose determines how wide or how small the opening is. To change the aperture size, simply dial different f-stop numbers into the camera. The smaller the f-stop number, the bigger the opening is. More light enters your camera. The larger the f-stop number, the smaller the opening is. Less light enters your camera. Wide aperture is good for low light situations because you are able to let more light into the camera. Without a wide aperture, you would struggle in low light. Aperture also affects your depth of field. Your depth of field is how blurred or in focus behind your subject is. For a traditional portrait look, you would use a small f-stop number such as f1.4, f2.8 that will give you a shallow depth of field. This gives you a huge creative option to blur your background and focus attention on the main subject. If you need the background to be in focus, you would use a larger f-stop number such as f8 or f11, and that will give you a wider depth of field. A small aperture is generally used for landscape photography to capture details and sharpness in the scene.